We are blessed to live in a place rich with natural resources and natural beauty. These outdoor spaces have helped define who we are as a people. You know, my family often says we don't have to leave Colorado. This is the best place in the country for staycation. Our outdoor spaces have a lot to do with that. Whether you're here in Denver, Colorado, enjoying the great network of parks that this great city enjoys, or up in the mountains, where we really have the best wonders in the world. As we plan for Denver's future in the face of unprecedented growth and work to build a socially and racially just and equitable community, it is important that access to nature and green space remains a fundamental right for all residents. The game plan for a healthy city defines our vision for creating parks, gathering places, activities that are easily accessed, well-maintained, and equitable in every neighborhood. We are proactively working to ensure that every household in the city and county of Denver is within a 10-minute walk or row of a quality park. We're working together toward a Denver that embraces everyone by connecting youth, families, and adults of all ages with a park system of expanded resources, increased access, and quality programming that meets residents where they are. I'm proud to serve as co-chair of the National Mayors for Parks Coalition. Denver is recognized at the national level for its diverse, vibrant, and dynamic park system. We haven't done this work alone. Partners like Volunteers for Outdoor Colorado are working alongside the city to build a culture of stewardship, engaging communities to take care of their parks and neighborhoods, today and for future generations. We couldn't do it without you, VOC. I'm excited to acknowledge tonight's outstanding panelists who are keenly aware of these issues and are leading spokespersons in how we can collectively begin to respond and take action. Taishya Adams, Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commissioner and Colorado Leader and Policy Director for Outdoor Afro. Parker McMullen-Bushman, Colorado State University Extension Director for the City and County of Denver and co-founder of Inclusive Journeys. And of course, Scott Gilmore, Deputy Manager of Parks and Recreation, Parks Director for the City and County of Denver. Scott has been someone that I have known for many, many years. I appointed him as my advisor to the Public Advisory Board for the City and County of Denver when I was on City Council. And today, he has been, for the last 9 years, a tremendous steward of our park system in the City and County of Denver. Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy this great panel.
My name is Trujillo of Denver 7, and I'm excited to talk with this group today about the intersection of outdoor stewardship and inclusivity. And so I want to start with just talking about this beautiful state that we live in, Colorado. It is one of the most beautiful places on earth, I think, and we have ample public lands, should be welcoming to all, yet not all feel so welcome. So let's just start with that. Why is that? Where is the disconnect? Taishya, let's start with you.
Sure, and thank you so much for having me today. And I think it's a balance between what the laws say and what the customs say, right? And so the law will say everyone has access to this park or this wildlife area, when the custom, the experience can vary from place to place. And so when I go on hikes with Outdoor Afro, we get looks. We get comments sometimes, both negative and positive, right? Because people aren't used to seeing as many Black people in the outdoors, versus if I'm by myself, I don't necessarily get as many comments, right? So sometimes it's about where I am, what kinds of activities that I'm doing. If I'm climbing, if I'm rock climbing, there's sometimes excitement, sometimes there's criticisms, versus if I'm just out, for a hike with my dog, then it might be a different experience. But I think the big takeaway is that it's not constant. It's not, it really does. You have to be on guard. You don't really know what could potentially happen. I'm very grateful to have many positive experiences in Colorado's public lands, but I would be remiss if I did not mention the few negative experiences that continue. And again, I did notice that those comments and those looks and those negative experiences tend to happen when there's more Black people, when I'm with more Black people, versus when I'm by myself.
So is that what you all think is holding people back? I mean, I know there are statistics that indicate people of color are not enjoying the great outdoors as they could or should. is it those experiences that is holding people back? Parker, Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, I think people of color are getting into the outdoors, but it's where are they going? Because, word gets spread by word of mouth about what spaces are really safe and welcoming, and that gets out in the community, and then people go to those spaces. Also, we have to realize that outdoor activities might look a little bit different, right? And so if you are outside, like Taishya said, rock climbing or hiking, there's excitement or acknowledgement around that. But if people are out, people go out to have picnics, people go out to play outside or take walks in their neighborhood, people hold community meetings outside, and we don't always hold those outdoor uses in the same esteem or light as some of the other uses. And so I think it's also about widening that narrative of what is an outdoor activity, what are people getting out and doing and enjoying, in addition to making sure that all of our spaces are really safe and welcoming, right, to all groups, because we're having this big national conversation now, and people are coming to this realization, some people for the first time, that maybe not everyone feels welcome in every space, right? And that has to do with those interactions that we have on an interpersonal level when we go into these spaces.
Scott, is that how you see it?
So yeah, I mean, for us, Taishya was, I think, hit it right on the head. When you go out, I'm a light-skinned person of color. I'm Black and Japanese. And so I have a privilege that darker-skinned individuals don't always have, and I understand that. And I have to actually work to help others spread the understanding that everybody should be welcome in these spaces. Working with kids, for over 25 years and taking them out, the looks that we would get were incredible. There'd be some people that were like, oh, this is great, you're doing it. But there were people, I remember taking a group of kids we were headed to Southwest Colorado, and we stopped at a Pizza Hut during a buffet to get some pizza. And the Pizza Hut actually told us they were out of dough when we walked in with 25 kids of color. And I've never heard of a Pizza Hut running out of dough. And so I was fine. Kids started getting I said, this is something that we will learn from. We will go to a different place. We will spend our money because our money is green. And you know what? We will move on. But this is a learning experience for those kids that they then learn that they weren't always welcome. We've been at national parks and being followed around by rangers, where the little white kids were just playing and doing the exact same thing, but the kids of color were being followed by rangers. So you have to be aware that those things happen in the outdoors, and it's our job to actually try to make sure that people that are out there in these agencies, because they're the ones that have to lead, understand that, you know what, if it's acceptable to them, it's going to be acceptable to the staff out there and then the people that are in the park. And that, in this country right now, that's coming from the top, and that their racist attitudes right now are really acceptable. And so we've got a lot of work to do.
And I think we talk a lot in just in general that there is systemic racism in a whole lot of systems. But when you're talking about our park systems, what change could take effect? What could we do as a community, as volunteers, as people out enjoying the great outdoors? How can we change that system to make people feel more welcome into what is, available to everybody? Taishya?
I'm always reminded that systems are made of people, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I think there's changes that have to happen at the individual level, at the cultural level, and at the systemic level, right? Some systems are agreements that we have with each other. And, I wish that the conversation that we were having right now was new, right? I know that some people feel like it's new, but really it's a conversation as far as access to public lands, the exact conversation we're having right now has been happening, right, for more than 20 years, right? And there have been scholars and researchers and policymakers who have really done a lot of work. And I think of Dr. Dorcetta Taylor's work, who's at Yale now. And she, you know, in her 2014 report on diversifying environmental organizations that looked at NGOs, foundations, and governmental agencies. And she had 3 recommendations. One was around transparency and tracking, right? So, you know, it's great to have a plan, but are there measurable goals that are annual, that are shared externally? The second is around accountability. So I'm thinking performance evaluations, assessments, right, at that systems level. And then the last was around resources. So obviously training is going to be key to this, but training isn't the only component. These other pieces are key. And I think of, you know, Dr. Polis's executive order on diversity, equity, inclusion, where he really puts those principles and strategies on their feet, in requiring our governmental agencies in Colorado to report on their diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, to do assessments on the climate, the working conditions, right? You know, and all of these pieces are absolutely critical. And, you know, going back to what Scott said about going into some of these parks, also being able to see ourselves. I think of the call to, you know, I go into visitor centers, I don't see anything on Black history or Asian history or even Indigenous history. It primarily is settler history. And so if we're talking about inclusivity, it's not just saying words, right? It is putting these words into actions.
I think those are great suggestions. Parker, let's let you jump in here and talk about overcoming those historical barriers that are in place.
I think that, you know, it is setting up our organizations to look at things in a different way. It's also looking at the roots of our organizations, because when we founded things like the National Park System, right, there were people who still couldn't visit places because of segregation and other things. So we have like kind of written into the roots and the history and the foundation of our organizations some of these issues. And I know that gets passed down, you know? So like in my community growing up, I remember my grandmother used to tell me, don't go outside. Don't go into the woods, right? Because there was this historical trauma around things like lynching and things that bad things could happen to you in that space. So there's also this kind of historical trauma and memory around certain communities that communities need to work with and work on. And I think that as we come together with those things, as organizations are working on how they view outdoor activities, how they view what counts as an outdoor activity, working on unconscious bias training so that when people go into these spaces, they are welcomed and not thought of that they could be doing something wrong. And communities start to do our own healing and our own celebration in these outdoor spaces. Then we will, you know, have spaces in public lands where everyone feels welcome and like they can use those spaces.
Sure. And I know, Scott, that City of Denver, you all have worked really hard to improve parks and create more park space. So talk a little bit more specifically about what you are doing to help those neighborhoods feel like they're a part of the City of Denver.
Yeah, I mean, that's super, super important. So historically, you know, it took us 400 years to get here. We ain't gonna just switch a flip, you know, and get out of this. This is gonna take a lot of work from a lot of us to really make a difference. As people that have been placed into positions of power, we need to understand that we have a job to do right now. So something that the Parks Department in Denver has done is really looked at an equity lens and saying, hey, you know, we have 260 parks in the city, but they aren't spread equally, and the stuff in those parks aren't all the same. So what we've done is actually created an equity map so we can look and see where there's a neighborhood that might have, you know, communities of color, income disparities, you might have obesity rates that are higher. And so what we're looking at those is we look at those items and we try to determine where we need to be adding park spaces, and not only just adding a park space, where we can improve a park, because you might have a park that's in a neighborhood that traditionally has been excluded from improvements in their park.
Mhm.
We can go in and improve that park, and that makes a huge difference. So that's the thing that we've really been doing to try to improve parks, especially in communities of color that traditionally have been excluded from those park improvements. Also, our parks are based on European models. So of course, historically, parks were always put, nicer parks were put in nicer neighborhoods, and all the money went to those neighborhoods. And then they kind of just did the bare minimum in communities of color. You can see that in Park Hill. You can see that in Montbello, Northeast Denver. You can see it in Westwood neighborhood. You can see it in Elyria, Swansea, Globeville. All those communities have not been allowed to enjoy the outdoors. So we've really been working on that to make sure that we're placing those amenities in those neighborhoods. One other thing I'd like to mention is we've got to make sure kids are connecting with the nature in their neighborhood. To try to say, I want to take a kid up to Rocky Mountain National Park, that is the wrong thing to do. You're going to take a kid up there and you're going to scare the Jesus out of them, because you're going to take them. It's going to be really quiet. It might be great for some people. Let's connect kids to the tree in front of their house, the tree in their neighborhood park. Let's do some butterfly gardens in the park in their neighborhood. Let's do gardens in the community. Let's connect people to their space, because trying to take people outside of their communities and connecting them with nature, it's a losing battle. We've got to connect them close to home.
Well, and the other issue that you're raising here, Scott, is that if we're going to try and take people to the high country and let's go climb a 14er, you don't just go climb a 14er in sneakers. And you need equipment. I mean, that's also pretty intimidating, is it not?
I've climbed one in my life. I've been doing this my whole life. I've driven up two.
I mean, that's what everybody talks about in
one.
Colorado,
And I don't know if I even want to do that anymore. I don't know if that's something that I really,
I have 4 under my belt. But
So-
but the whole point is, and Taishya, you can speak to this, it's also intimidating. Yes, the mountains are there, but that doesn't mean I'm going to drive up there, because it's, you have to be prepared for something like this.
Well, and I think that it also raises some other issues around transportation, around gear. And so when we talk about accessibility, it's not just one component. There are several layers depending on what you're trying to do. And so that transportation piece, there's a shuttle now, I believe from Denver, that goes to El Dorado Canyon State Park, which actually was an overcrowding issue that was happening in that small community with cars coming, and so they had this shuttle system that they worked out, and so again, it not only alleviates the crowding, but it also increases accessibility when it comes to transportation. But still, that's an hour-long drive each way, right? And so you get to be in the park, so that you spent more time in the car or on a bus than you did in the park. So that's something else to think about. But I have been inspired by what I've seen in New Mexico with their Outdoor Equity Fund. I know that folks in Colorado are also coming together and really working on how do we ensure access around gear, around park passes, et cetera, especially when we're talking about the socioeconomic divide. And I also just wanted to make a point around the importance of partnerships. Scott referenced, you don't have to go all the way to Rocky Mountain. There is opportunities to engage. The environment is from the door, as soon as you open it, all the way out into the wilderness unknown. And so how can we better partner? I think Denver Parks and Rec does an amazing job partnering with schools and hospitals and community centers, really trying to find ways to leverage existing resources that that others have to come together. And I think of, Parker and her work with the Summit for Action, where she brings together, environmental organizations, agencies in the Denver metro area annually, where we can come together and really work to dismantle some of these inequities, as well as reimagine what space and nature and the outdoors can mean and look like together. Parker, you were going to say something. I saw your hand.
I know she wants to jump in here. Go ahead, Parker.
Well, what struck me with what both Taishya and Scott said is, that really understanding what communities need in how they access the outdoors. Like, I've seen organizations come in and say to communities, like, we want to do a program, we want to partner with you. What is it that you need? And the community responds, we would like to fix our nearby nature. We want to, can we make a garden that our community can access? Can we tear up this concrete basketball court to make an actual park with trees and things? And people hear, like, the community gives that feedback, and what people hear are trips to the mountains, right? Because they are kind of stuck in the way that they relate to nature, and they feel like that is the only way, to really get people involved. But like what was said before, that connection to your nearby nature is so important, and people having that ability to build that up, and for communities to speak on how that connection best benefits them, what is most significant to them. I think we have to hear that and also honor that, know that the community has their best interests and their needs in mind, and they can give that to you.
Sure, it's asking people what they would like, not telling them what they need, right?
Yeah.
So we're speaking here before an audience of volunteers for Outdoor Colorado. So what would you say to them right now about what they can be doing to just make this a better place for everybody, a more welcoming place for everybody?
So
Scott, you're always last. I was going to say.
Go for it, Scott.
So as VOC is doing great work out there, and they're doing tons of projects across the state. And a lot of their work is in the mountains, doing trail work. They do urban stuff. One of the things that they, and I even brought this up to their leadership. I said, who does your board comprise of? Do you have people of color on your board, first of all? And not just on your board to say, hey, we have a Black person on the board, or we have a Hispanic person on the board. No, it's not about just adding a person of color to your board. It's about being inclusive and hearing what a person comes to the board brings, their historical aspects of their engagement with the outdoors. And so just don't add somebody just so you can check a box, first of all. Next thing you need to do is definitely try to begin to spread where you're doing your work. There are so many good groups that have already been mentioned during this talk that VOC could be reaching out to and saying, hey, how do we do volunteer projects in communities of color or neighborhoods that really need the work? Look a little bit differently. Instead of looking to go do a trail on a 14,000 foot peak, why don't we go do a trail in Swansea? Why don't we go do a trail work along the South Platte River or along one of the gulches in Westwood neighborhood? Think a little bit differently and think outside the box. And so I think really reaching out to communities and seeing, engaging them, not coming in and saying, hey, we're coming here to save your neighborhood, but asking, saying, how can we help? We want to work with you to provide a project that kids and families can be engaged in to help their own community. But don't come in thinking they're going to save a neighborhood, because that's the worst thing you can do, because that takes away any kind of trust that a community will have in an organization.
I love that. Great suggestion, Scott. Taishya, what would you say? What would you say to VOC?
I would build on that to say, really focusing on with and not for. And so oftentimes I've had organizations reach out. I know that obviously Colorado Parks and Wildlife, we have a huge volunteer base, and a lot of our our programs are wanting to be more inclusive, to diversify around race and gender and ethnicity. And so, my first question is, look at your own friend group. If you don't see the diversity that you want to see in the programs in the outdoors, that's where you need to start, right? That's a really powerful way to start. And I did this work myself coming to Colorado. I realized, most of my friends are Black or white. So I joined Latino Outdoors, and I joined Native Women's Wilderness, and I joined Queer in Nature. And you show up, and you keep showing up before I ask for anything. Show up before you ask for anything. Just show up and listen. Right? It should be reciprocal. I'm looking for reciprocal experiences. I think another thing to be mindful of is, and this is an odd connection, which is the wage gap, right? So if I am, as a Black woman, I'm working, 54 cents on the dollar now for white men, it takes me twice as long to make what one white man makes, right? And so I don't have as much time to volunteer. So it's going to be really important to think strategically about how much time, especially for low-income community members, to really meaningfully participate. And there are ways to do that, but we just need to reimagine what volunteerism looks like. It may not be showing up for a half day or a whole day off-site somewhere far. It could be, as Scott mentioned, the neighborhood right across the street, or the little garden space, or the vacant lot, or how can we make it accessible and meaningful?
Parker, I know you work with organizations to help them become more culturally competent. How do you do that? When you look at organizations out there, what is it that they need most, and how can that be applied to organizations that work with nature?
Yeah, so there first comes the understanding, right? And that's where a lot of organizations start at, that trying to get an understanding of why this is so vital, why this is so important. And we see that our demographics across the nation are shifting so greatly. By 2023, kids 18 and younger will be majority minorities, right? And then in 25 more years, we're going to have a majority minority nation. But when we look at the environmental movement, when we look at the conservation movement, it is still very much the same, right? It's still very much a monolith. And that understanding that the things that I care about, when I worry about the environment, when I worry about climate change, when I worry about all of these other things, and I want to leave a legacy, right? That in order to leave that legacy, I have to involve my entire community. And that community may look very different than what I have thought of in the past, right? And so first comes the understanding, and then that kind of coming to grips and dealing with what are the things that are baked into our system. When we look at the way our organization has been created, when we look at the tree that we have grown, a lot of people have an organizational tree and they want different fruit, right? They're like, why do we only have peaches? But they're not willing to look at the roots. And so coming to that reckoning that we have to examine the roots, it might mean rebuilding. It might mean it's going to be something bigger than a graph, right? You might put a graph onto your tree, but it's not going to be as healthy as the rest of the tree. And so we may even need to cut down the tree and grow something different. And so organizations coming to that understanding and dealing with unconscious bias, dealing with the oppression that is within their organization, and coming out on the other side as something different. And then also listening to their community, understanding the changes that they have to make, and then moving forward in a way that is fully dedicated, right? They're not holding back. They're not saying, well, this or that, but they're like, these are the changes that we need to make to really be relevant into the future. And we are wholeheartedly going to go forward with that. And those are the organizations that I see that have the most success in that change that I work with.
And
One thing I
do
want to mention is, I think as organizations from VOC to Colorado Parks and Wildlife to, I'm on the board of the National Wildlife Federation. And so organizations need to see how embracing the diversity of the population of the United States is going to benefit them. Like Colorado Parks and Wildlife, they are based on an income based on selling license. And so if they do not continue to encourage the growing, the changing demographics to hunt and fish, their license sales come down. That means their revenue comes down. So this is also a survival. This is a survival thing for organizations. If you do not change right now, your organization will die. So I think this is something that people need to understand, that, yeah, they want to hold on to how it was, but this country is changing as we're watching. And I think people need to understand their survival, their organization's survival depends on them changing with it.
And it's not that there's not going to be something on the other side, right? Because people of color do care about the environment. People of color do care about the outdoors, right? And so you see a lot of groups that are coming up and that are forming their own thing because they are not finding a space within traditionally white-led organizations. And so, what Scott said is so powerful, because those are the organizations that are going to flourish, because they are including everyone. They are really listening to this population that is growing and changing, and people are coming to those organizations, not just people of color, but also white folks are coming to those organizations because they want to be involved in something that's inclusive. And so if your organization isn't doing that, then you will see less and less people as those people bleed off to something that is new and inclusive.
And I think what you all are saying is relevant and timely and can apply to any organization. However, we also know that the wheels move very slowly when we're talking about change and systemic change. So how do we push that along? How can that be pushed along? Taishya, what do you think?
Well, again, I'm going to go back to that accountability piece, right? I mean, I think that, and recognizing and using our power, privilege, and platform, figuring out what, almost doing like a power analysis, right? And that's not, just our elected officials. I think of obviously Governor Polis. I mentioned the new DEI executive order. The Department of Natural Resources also has a DEI goal around recruitment and hiring, as well as being more inclusive in our history of and narratives that we tell within our public spaces. But then also accountability at our own personal level, right? Like every day we're making decisions on whether we want to contract into our own bubble or whether we want to really extend and into new experiences, and really challenging our own biases and unlearn, right, some of the things that we have been strategically miseducated about, right? I just finished reading Undercurrents of Power, the aquatic culture of the African diaspora, and learned that Africans have a rich tradition of fishing and canoeing and diving and all of these things. And I'm like, wait, my whole life I was told that I couldn't swim. And so again, it's about that unlearning at the individual level, but there also has to be some accountability levers across the board. And I'm happy that our Congress people are thinking about this through, the Great American Outdoors Act and other acts at the state level, at the local level, obviously with Denver Parks and Recreation, and I'm up in Boulder, in the city up in Boulder, but really again making sure that this type of transformational work is happening at every level of power that we have, and also recognizing that this is not specific to outdoor spaces, right? The issues that we have here are issues that are in the public education space, in the health space, in our workforce. When we talk about access, meaningful representation, participation, quality, these are issues that reverberate, because going back to what Parker said, it starts from the same root. And I would be remiss if I did not mention the indigenous history of the public lands that we're talking about, right? So from the root of this public land conversation, we already had a misstep that we're still working towards acknowledging, and land acknowledgements are great, but where are our indigenous brothers, sisters, and others on the boards and on the staff and on the leadership team? Again, we just want to be at a table that we all help to build. Many of us help to build for free or for less than, right? And so we're not asking anybody to be exiled from the table. We are simply asking for a seat at the table. And hey, it may not even be a table. It may be the campfire. It may be a picnic. It may be, right? But again, you know, inclusivity starts at home. It starts in in the conversations you have, the people you have in your life, what you're reading, what you're listening to. That's where inclusion can be the most powerful ripple effect across everything you do.
Well said. Yes, Parker, go for it.
Yeah, so, you know, organizations have this conversation around other things, right? Even really, really old organizations, as they start to really work to be relevant in today's society, they're having conversations about how they can change quickly, right? We say that the wheels move slowly, right? Until organizations realize, oh, there's another thing coming. There's an Amazon, there's a Google, there's, you know, something that's new and vibrant and speaking to people. And how do we change to keep up with that, right? And so organizations do make changes, right, when they understand that it is rooted in their survival and it's rooted in their dollars and in their pockets. And so I think we have to make those connections. People need to understand. They say, what is the business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And it is your longevity. And people have to have that understanding, right? That it seems like it's a nice to have, but really it is essential to your long-term business plan to be inclusive.
Scott, anything you want to add?
One thing I think we need to definitely do to, you know, we talk about how do we make this change? I think one of the most important things is to teach our children about the history. We have not taught our kids. I learned so many things as I've been in this arena that I just didn't know. You think about all these, you know, organizations out there and that, oh, well, Black people don't like being outdoors. That's a joke. Our first national park rangers were Black men that took care of our first national parks, the Buffalo Soldiers. Audubon, an organization out there that, you know, millions of people are part of the Audubon Society, and they bird watch and they go out there and, oh, I'm part of the Audubon Society. Do they understand that they're in an organization that's named after a Black man that actually, you know, did drawings and had to go to Europe to get his drawings published? People don't know history.
Right.
And to not know that and connect our kids to that and understand that it's okay for you to want to be a park ranger. It's okay for you to want to be a forest ranger, or young women to be a park ranger, or to be an aquatic biologist. We need to make sure that our children know that it's okay for them to be anything they want. And they can be in the outdoors and it can be a safe space. So that's on us to make sure that they understand that and that we help make that public space safe for them.
I love all of your ideas, and we have to start wrapping up. So I just want to ask you to take a moment.
Really? Come
yes,
on.
I'm so sorry.
We can go on for a couple
I know
hours.
it. I love that. This is a great conversation. I would just like for you to ponder for a moment. Is there some message you want to get across that we have not spoken of yet? And you know, and you can each have like one last word and take about a minute to do that. Is that something that works for you all? We can do it that way. Who wants to go first? Just a final thought, just something that we haven't discussed that maybe should be part of this discussion for VOC.
This is Taishya. I'm happy to take a first stab at a closing comment. You know, and it's actually a comment that I said a couple of years ago, and it's still resonating with me. And that is, I was reading an article, I think it's called A Letter to a White Environmentalist. And it really was talking about inclusivity. And it kind of, the thesis was step up, step aside or step down. And step up is, if you see something, say something, using your power or privilege. We all have power. And so really harness it. If you see something, say something, step up. Be empowered, step aside. So again, if there is, if you're looking around and you want to diversify in whatever way, if it's race, if it's geography, if it's ethnicity, if it's language, and you're seeing a mono of whatever, step aside. Things don't, like my mom says, sadly, if you die tomorrow, somebody will come and take your place, right? Your work will live on, but others will need to do the work. And so recognizing sometimes you have to step aside and make room for other people to come in. And then lastly, stepping down and recognizing that sometimes it's not enough to just step aside. Sometimes you have to step down. And when you do, make sure that there's others in the pipeline to take over that spot. Make sure you're doing solid succession planning so that when you leave, the next person is ready to step in and hit the ground running right from the beginning. Because what is happening is people will, they're diversifying the pipeline. That's great. But when they get into these organizations and agencies, oftentimes they're the only one, right? I'm the only Black person on the Commission for Colorado Parks and Wildlife right now. And it's a very lonely experience, right? I'm starting to feel like, I'm the only one bringing up certain issues, and thankfully I have other commissioners who are also committed to justice and not only of the planet and wildlife, but people on it, right? And making that intersectional environmentalism a part of the core of what they're doing. But still, it is exhausting being the only one. And so having the opportunity to think about succession planning when you're talking about diversity and making sure that the climate, when they arrive, that workplace climate is a healthy one where they feel valued and seen and heard is absolutely essential. So those are my pros and cons.
Perfect. That was great. That was great. Thank you. Parker or Scott?
I'm happy to go next. So as a conservationist and environmentalist, in the last, since the protests started, something I've been really thinking about is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Right. And when we talk about the environment and we talk about wanting to get together to save the planet, that is a higher level need on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That is a self-actualization need that's at the very tip of the pyramid. And at the bottom of that pyramid is base needs like water, air, food, and then you have shelter, and then you have family and community, and then you have, needing to feel connection to others around you. All of these things have to happen before you can get to that save the planet need. And that's really struck me as important as we are having conversations in this intersection of social justice issues and the environment, because we like to think that social justice issues are separate from the work that we do, environmental work that we do, but it's so tied in, because if we want people to be able to climb that ladder, to get up that pyramid, to reach those self-actualization needs, we need to make sure that everyone in our community has their base needs taken care of. So when someone says, you hear someone say that chant, that word, those words, I can't breathe, right? When you hear someone say that they are feeling oppressed and like that's what all they can focus on, we are actually taking the support that we need away from environmental issues when we don't address those, when we don't think about those, right? And so I think that everyone within our community, it doesn't matter who you are, you have a role to play in these social justice issues. We need everyone. Everyone has a role to play and something to help move things across. And when you work on social justice issues, you're actually also helping to save the environment. You're also helping to get people to where they need so that they can take these higher level steps.
Well said. Thank you. Scott?
So from my standpoint, I'm never a big data person or a person that crunches numbers or say, well, how many people do this and what's the return and all that. I'm the kind of person that is just about making an experience. And so all those years I taught kids how to fish at Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Probably taught 250,000 kids easily how to fish in a 20-year career. And people have said, well, how many of those kids actually maybe bought a license or something? And I'm like, I don't know. But guess what? If I didn't take that child fishing, somebody may never taken that kid fishing either. So they would have never had that experience. Me taking a young person fishing and getting them that outdoor experience, if how to fish or not, just having a great outdoor experience, guess what? They'll look back on that when they're an adult and say, you know what? I remember going fishing. Maybe I should take my kid fishing. You know, if you don't give people experiences, how can they provide those to their kids? Be a mentor to a young person. If you don't like fishing, that's fine. If you don't like hunting, that's fine. Take them for a walk in the park. Look at the trees, look at the grasses, look at the butterflies. Enjoy the outdoors. Mentor somebody. Show them it's okay to be outdoors. Because we need to give our young people an experience where they can embrace the outdoors and say, I want to be that. I want to be that wildlife biologist. I want to study aquatic. I want to study dolphins, or I want to study trees. I want to study grass or butterflies. I have done that over my career, and I can see, I still to this day, I will be out in a restaurant and a lady or somebody will come up to me with a kid that's, 6'3", and she'll look at me and she'll be like, you took my kid fishing when he was 8 years old. I'm like, really? I done got old because, this kid will be, 25 years old. But that experience made a difference in their lives. And so that's what it's about, making a difference in people's lives. Take them to participate in a VOC trail building event. Just make it happen. Don't sit there and say, what can I do? Do it.
And it's free. Volunteerism is free, right? That's the best part. Thank you, Scott Gilmore, Taishya Adams, Parker McMullen-Bushman. You all have been terrific and have given us great things to think about and easy, tangible things that can affect change in this world. So thank you all very much. Appreciate it.